Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor family? Welcome into Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Friday, September 20th, and Grace and I have a bonus Mailbag episode for you. For the next 25 minutes or so, we're going to answer only questions submitted by premium members on sikkim365.com about Baylor football in general, but also about the game tomorrow against Colorado. We normally do this in our Wednesday episode, but we just felt like, man, we need more time. We want to answer all the questions we can and, spend more time on specific ones. And so we made it its own episode. Here we are. We're excited to do this, and hopefully we can try to do it every week. But so let's get right into them. I know this is kind of an interesting question considering the quarterback position right now, but will Baylor finally get an outside receiver going? I'll kind of hop on this one. I want to say this first, and I'll let you get to your response. But I think it's important to mention that Josh Cameron right now is playing a lot of outside receivers. 78.8% of his snaps, according to Pro Football Focus, are coming on the outside. Some of that's because Hal Presley was out this last game, but he's kind of a guy that can do it all. So I think it's important to mention that, and he is kind of going. He's getting a lot of targets and a lot of receptions, and has been pretty consistent out there as well.
I was going to say, I think it's kind of doing a disservice to say, when are they going to get one going, when Josh Cameron's played pretty well. I would say even in the Utah game, I mean, he was kind of the bright spot there. I think naturally people want to see Ketron Jackson kind of get going. And I think that Baylor would probably like to see that too. And how Presley's been hurt. So it's just it's basically just been, either Ketron has a big play or it's just all the targets on the outside are going to Josh Cameron. And so I'm very curious about that. I actually don't think this is the week where it's like, oh, an outside receiver is about to blow up. I think they're going to have their hands full with Colorado's cornerbacks. I actually think the guys that are probably going to get going a little more are Ashton Hawkins and Michael Trigg and potentially Monterey Baldwin. I think those are the three that I'm looking at in the slot kind of range, who I think are going to be really effective and really tough for Colorado to defend. Outside wise, I think that just going into it, I think this is going to be a tough matchup for Baylor on the outside.
Yeah, so I'm going to be interested to see if Hal Presley is back, if and how the Ketron and Hal and Josh Cameron utilized, because you want one of those guys on the field. But is it a situation where maybe you move him inside to get a more favorable matchup, because you know that they rep it all? So not that Ketron's going to come in and play 75% in the slot, or Hal's obviously not going to play that much. But how much does Josh Cameron come down into the slot? Where do these guys move around? Because I think there's going to be some game plan emphasis on, okay, where are our matchups? But you're right. I mean, it's Ketron, Hal. Those are the two guys that you need to make plays. And right now they've combined for 3 catches. Obviously, Hal was targeted out with a concussion last week. You hope he's back. But yeah, I mean, outside of Josh has been consistent, but now you need another guy to step up. So I'm anxious to see it. And I will say too, I think that Michael Trigg, as diverse as he is, he's not playing outside, but as a tight end, he's getting targeted a ton, especially in safety net situations. And he's so reliable and still a playmaker that I think sometimes by default, you get those targets more from a quarterback. So that, man, I trust this throw. It's there, and he can potentially break a big one. So a lot of potential. But I'm right there. I want to see Ketron and Hal move forward. So good question there. Moving on to on the defensive side of the ball, who is the best nose tackle for getting a push in pass rush? Grayson, I'll let you hop on
that. To me is definitely Cooper Lands. I don't even think it's close. But I will say this emphasizes the loss of Brendan Bett a ton, because I do think Brendan was poised to play nose tackle and potentially an end spot. Like, he was going to kind of do it all and be in my eyes, one of their top 4 interior guys. And so you were pretty much going to have, I think, Trevin, Jackie, Cooper, and Brendan as kind of your 4 interior lineman rotation. And now you don't have him. And then Cooper Lands goes down with the ankle injury. And now you're starting to see, okay, having to rely on a redshirt freshman in DK Kalu to basically take the bulk of the snaps against Air Force. Linus Noel just didn't play the first half, came in the second half. Hopefully he continues to take steps in the right direction because they're going to need him. But in general, with the team they got, it's Cooper Lands, and that's why it's so important that they get him back, because I do think in this matchup, the ability to create some pressure from the inside and really push the offensive line back into the quarterback is a big deal.
Yeah, and we haven't really seen it from this line this year yet because of the teams that they've played. They're just not getting tested, but Cooper, 100%, that's what I put down. Cooper Lands. But I'm kind of torn because I think it's situationally is Jackie Marshall. And if they're running the peso where they have basically two down linemen, and he's kind of the nose tackle in that setting, but like he potentially could be a guy that's your best pass rusher. He's just not going to play there all the time. Right. And Cooper is going to be the most steady guy. And so if you see Jackie slide down to the nose tackle position, there's potential there. And that's what they're looking for. And in that moment, he's just not going to get a ton of snaps there. Linus Noel, he's not your pass rusher. He's your guy that's going to eat up 2 blocks and be strong and physical and stop the running game. So I'm really curious to see how much we see him against Colorado, because this is not the same type of matchup, which makes Cooper Lands coming back even more important of saying, who's playing nose tackle in this game, because Linus is not that type of guy. Now, he could come in and maybe push the pocket a little bit, but that's just not how he's built. He's going to be a guy that just stands up against the run. So, yeah, I'm with you. It's Cooper, Jackie potentially, but we saw Trevin play quite a bit of nose tackle if you go back and watch the tape against Air Force, and that could have been situationally as well, but we know he played it some last year too. So they have some options. It's just who's the best pass rusher? Cooper Lands, especially in this particular matchup.
Right. If you're specifically saying nose tackle, it's definitely him. But I do agree. If you're just talking interior defensive lineman, then it would probably be Jackie Marshall with relative ease. So we'll see. We'll see how they battle. I agree with you, though. Will Linus play a big role, or maybe they roll with DK Kalu just for a little bit more pass rushing upside?
Yeah. How much do you trust each one of those guys to do what they're supposed to do at the end of the day? Because you're going to need to be trusted on the defensive line. They're going to play a big role, even if they're not getting sacks this week. So moving back to the offensive side of the ball, does Bryson Washington get 60% of the snaps on Saturday? I'll let you take this one first as well.
So he got 28 snaps this past week, and all the other backs combined for 40 snaps. But again, it was a blowout. So I don't think those numbers truly indicate which way they'd be leaning. But in general, I think if the game had trended to being a really close game, or the game was close at the end, I think he probably would have been in that 50 to 60% range. So yeah, I think that's where things are leaning, unless Dominic Richardson gets really healthy and starts eating into the snaps early in the game. Because if he doesn't, then yeah, I think Bryson will definitely get to the 60% number.
Yeah, so 60% is a lot. We know how much they want to rotate guys. And it really, to me, it depends on maybe what Colorado's trying to do defensively. Because if they're just saying we're just going to muck up the interior part of the line, maybe Richard Reese gets more carries than he normally was. So I think situationally, but I mean, he's the guy that's going to get the most carries. He's going to play the majority of the snaps in the crucial moment. So if it's 3rd and 1 right now, I mean, I feel like he's the kind of the best option, because he can potentially get you the short yards, or that's going to be a strength potentially. And then also getting through the line of scrimmage on 3rd and 1 and breaking one. Pass catcher, obviously he's shown the ability to do that despite the fumble. That's kind of been a thing with him dating back to his true freshman year, was like he can catch the ball well out of the backfield. He's going to be reliable. So he doesn't really have any, quote, holes in his game that you might lean to and say, well, Dawson Pendergrass can't do this, or Richard Reese can't do this, or Dominic Richardson. Like, I don't know if you can say that about Bryson yet. There could be that some that become exposed we just haven't seen. So him playing the majority of the snaps makes the most sense. Like, I just think that's where this has really trended. It trended in the fall that direction of Bryson's kind of emerging as the number 1 guy, and now here we are. So he's either it or he's not. And in a game like this where you might need to run the football to kind of keep possession away from Colorado, why would you not lean on your best guy?
Right. And I agree with that. I think they're going to lean into this and give him the football, but they are going to use the other backs, because at the end of the day, he's still a redshirt freshman, and there's still probably some things that we don't get to see every single day that maybe they like out of the other running backs. So I think that's important to mention kind of as we move forward here. But again, crucial moments, I do think Bryson will be the guy. And that's why last week when they run for a 4th and 1, it's like, man, you might have wanted to give the ball to Bryson Washington in that situation, just because, that's a crucial moment to me. And you want guys who are more built to fall forward in a 4th-and-1 situation.
Yeah, I mean, it was just later in the game, you saw what Richard Reese is capable of doing, a one cut up the field on the edge, and he breaks one. 4th-and-1, I think they kind of got out a little ahead of themselves. Not that they didn't realize the personnel in the game, but that's not going to be Richard's strong suit. There's times when what they need is exactly what he is. That particular moment was not it. So you risk taking him off the field. And truthfully, like Dominic Richardson, if he's in the game in that moment, that makes sense. You leave him in the game and you don't have to sub out. But there needs to be some situational awareness there. And that might change if Dominic comes back and starts getting more consistent carries, that they didn't want to pull Reese off in that moment because that's not what they would typically do. So we'll see. I think the running back position is fascinating, especially because the offensive line needs to get better. And I think the running backs can help that. We'll talk about that in a question in a minute. So, Grayson, what about the health? This was another question, the health of the Bears going to Saturday. We'll just touch on these briefly because we don't know a ton other than what we know from last week.
Right. So quick rundown. Tevin Williams, still don't know what's going on there. He's been out for the first few weeks. I think he's dealing with something. We haven't heard any updates, so I would assume he's probably not going to be back for this game. And if he is, probably be in a depth type role behind Lorando Johnson, Caden Jenkins, and Chateau Reed. Outside of him, Carl Williams had a knee sprain, was officially trending in the right direction going into the Air Force game, according to Dave Aranda. Didn't play him in that game. And so I think most people would envision that he'll probably be okay for this Colorado game, but we don't know for sure. No confirmation yet from Miranda. Cooper Lands practiced all this week as well, just like Carl did, but his ankle was taped up very heavily, according to Dave Aranda. So we will see kind of how that trended throughout the week. Either way, I don't think you'll see a 100% Cooper Lands going into the game. I don't know if he'll be on a snap count, but it would kind of make sense just kind of with, how much they'd be pushing it after an ankle sprain to get him back in 2 weeks. Outside of that, Daquan Fenn practiced this week, so all reports seem like he's going to be available. But again, I think you and I are both expecting Sora Robertson to get the start. That hasn't officially been announced yet. Outside of that, I think the only other one is Hal Presley, right? Which it seemed like Dave Aranda said. Yeah, he said that he will likely get back to practice this week. They're hopeful, but they don't know if he'll get enough practice time in to make it for this game. My guess is he probably doesn't play in this one.
Yeah. I mean, you hope you get him back in a situation where you need as many receivers as you can. We talked about the lack of production, the outside receiver. You would hope that Hal can be back, but if not, you hope you get him back for the next week. You can't rush concussions. So it's not like you can play injured on a concussion like you could at ankle or something like that. So moving on now, what does a tempo look like for this game? Do you look for Baylor to slow it down to keep Colorado off the field, or do you speed it up? Give me time of possession predictions. A lot there. I think Aranda said it best. Like, we can't not be who we are when it came to offense. They need to run tempo. That's going to be when they're best. We saw that after the Utah game going into Air Force. The tempo was more prevalent in the Air Force game when they had the ball. So I expect that they are going to utilize tempo against Colorado. And I think where it becomes kind of hectic because you're facing another tempo team is that you want to keep the ball away from them. But I think at the end of the day, like, tempo and the clock still moving is all about incompletions and running the football, right? So, like, you can still run the clock a lot more if you're not having a lot of incompletions. You're not going out of bounds. When I say out of bounds, the clock gets going back pretty quickly now. But in general, like, just don't have the clock stop and be steady for 3 possessions in a row, because if you do that, you're giving Colorado more time. So I would say that, yes, tempo is going to be there, but be efficient with the football. And I think that's what they will try to do, is like keep the chains moving, keep the clock running in all instances.
So, yeah, I think Baylor is ultimately going to run with tempo. I think just naturally the fact that I expect Baylor to run the football more than Colorado leads me to believe that Baylor will win the time of possession battle. Nebraska won the time of possession 35-25 in their matchup. I think if Baylor can get around that, probably they're going to be around that 32-34 level is what I would expect in a competitive game, that Baylor is able to hold it that long and ultimately win the time of possession, not by a landslide, but by, probably like 7 or 8 minutes, something along those lines. And if they can get to that, I think that's a good thing. I think they are going to move with tempo, but again, they're going to run the football, whereas Colorado is going to have incompletions because they're going to throw the football a ton. I think that's going to be the biggest differentiator between the time of possession, even though I think both teams will run up tempo.
Yeah. I mean, and then ultimately the deciding factor in running the football is how successful do you do it? And if you're running the ball in tempo and you're doing it successfully, I mean, that's like a winning formula in spades, because in this particular game, like if you're moving up without having to throw it and you're keeping the ball away from them, but you're also moving it down the field, that's crucial. And truly, if you look back to Colorado's over the last 2 seasons, obviously with Dion there and everything they've done offensively, the teams that have beat them have done exactly that. The games where it's back and forth, there's no time of possession edge. And Colorado's staying in the game because they had the ball pretty often. You look at games against Stanford last year, USC last year, but then the games where they just haven't controlled the clock, or they don't want to control the clock. They're not concerned about it. The opponents are concerned about controlling the clock. And so if Baylor's able to run it well, I mean, that's a massive thing for this particular game. So with that, kind of good segue into this, who is the best running back combination? We talked on this a little bit earlier about Bryson Washington, but what's your opinion, even though we haven't even seen Dominic Richardson to a full extent this year?
So I would say it's a game-by-game basis, depending on what you need. The only sure thing is that Bryson Washington is in that list, that duo. He's at the top of that list. He's the 1A in any duo in my eyes. I think ultimately I like looking at things that differentiate players. And I think the home run hitting ability of Richard Reese is more complementary to Bryson Washington than having a Dominic Richardson, who to me is just a not quite as good Bryson Washington, if that makes sense. So it's just like, okay, you got 2 guys that run hard, run physical, but why don't you just give the ball to Bryson Washington? Whereas I think Richard Reese truly gives them a change of pace and the ability to break the big run, the big touchdown run. And that's very different than the other guys on the roster aside from Bryson.
Yeah, and I'm kind of right there with you, but I think the concern comes in is how long does it take you to get to Richard Reese in those moments? So does Bryson need 6-7 carries before he kind of softens up the defense? And is that where a guy like Dominic Richardson becomes valuable? It's like, okay, hey, we just got Bryson 3 carries. We bring in Dom for a couple more, but then you're getting essentially the same thing. But then just like we saw in the Air Force game, and you don't want to like dedicate too much thought into that particular play, but it was over and over and over between the tackles, and they bring in Reese and get him on the edge and he scores. So it's just, I think it's probably a game by, or a series by series deal. Kind of like, okay, when is the spot to insert this? The defense is really coming in hard on the run game and we can get some speed on the edge. So I think we both had the same mindset. I think mine's more about Bryson and Dominic, because I think they do run similar, but Bryson also has shown and has the ability to kind of be a home run hitter of his own, differently than Reese. Reese is, he's not going to break a ton on his own by making guys miss, but if he gets the lane, he's going to go. Bryson can kind of create his own stuff. So I think we're in the same mindset. I just think that, I'm partial to Dominic Richardson. Like, I think he provides another level of physicality that Bryson might, and it's more because he's seeking it out. I think Bryson's looking to make a guy miss. Dominic's going to go and run guys over. He's done it his entire career. So that's my thought process.
Right. I think it just comes down to, honestly, like I said, the game by game thing. Like, there's going to be some where it's a physical team and you're going to have to run the football between the tackles. And the big plays aren't necessarily going to be the thing that wins you the game. And so I think that's kind of the mindset that I'm in, is that, complimentary wise, Reese fits, I think, Bryson better. But then I think if you're talking, hey, we need a physical football game, we don't need a change of pace guy in there yet, then I think Dominic is, again, the next best option for that. Yeah,
absolutely. So then this next question's kind of all plays all together. I don't know if these are from the same user or not, but does a rainy evening favor offense or defense? Right now, it looks like there's like a 90% chance of rain all day in Boulder on Saturday. That's potentially a big shift for, I would say, more so for Colorado, because they haven't emphasized rushing the football. I think they're probably more suited to throw the football in rainy weather than Baylor would be, just because their experience and their quarterback play. But it's hard for me to say. I think there's reasons that both could prefer it. I think truthfully, it probably depends on how much it's rained. Because if it's from the point they go out there to start warming up, if it's raining and everything's soaked, that's much different than some showers coming throughout the game. Because if it's just consistently, steadily raining all afternoon through warmups, I think that the mindset has to shift for Colorado more than it does for Baylor.
Right. I think in general, just answering this question rather easily, I think it favors the defense, and then I think it favors Baylor. I think this is definitely not a style that Colorado wants to be in, where they're not able to throw the football as effectively as they normally do. I think that would be a huge problem for them, and a much bigger problem for them than it would be for Baylor.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality of throwing the football. So we've seen it in previous years. I think back to Baylor's 2015 game against TCU, where it was just a colossal downpour for most of the game, and it affected everything. Two really high-powered offenses weren't high-powered that day because of the rain. So I don't expect that type of weather. I think the biggest concern would be if it's raining just enough that you lose footing for the defense and it becomes an issue in the quick passing game, things like that. But in general, there's not very often that you say rain doesn't help the defense. So that's kind of where I am. And I think right now, because of what Baylor wants to do offensively, they're in a better position if it does start raining. So moving on, how much of Jake Spavital's offense has yet to be implemented for Baylor? You can hop on this one. I have plenty of thoughts about it, though.
I think that he would need a second off season for it to really be everything that he would want it to be, a fully implemented offense. I just think that takes time. Maybe even in bowl prep, you're able to get closer to that. So if that's everything that he wanted, you know what I mean? Like if it was everything he ever wanted to install with this offense, I think it'll take one more off season. So my guess is they're probably in that 70% range is what I would guess, especially in the passing game. I think we're going to see kind of a little more nuance to their passing game as things move forward, maybe a little bit in the run game as well. But I would say 70 is probably the number I'm looking at right now.
Yeah, so back in the offseason or in this end of summer leading into fall camp, he said they had installed 75 plays. It was actually the largest install that they've had. Now, that doesn't mean they're running all of that, right? That doesn't mean that they are going out there against Tarleton, Utah, and Air Force and actually running everything. I don't think defenses don't allow you to run everything that you could potentially run. So how much of that is executable at this point? I don't think there's any way to really know. I think we'll see changes from game to game. So if they could feel comfortable running 60 of their plays, I think that's probably a decent ballpark range of that 75. But yeah, good question there. I mean, I don't think we really know. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how much has the offensive line improved from game 1 to game 3? And what would you expect that to be by the end of the season compared to the Big 12 so far?
So kind of a weirdly worded question. So a scale of 1 to 10 just based on improvement, not kind of where they're at. So I guess improvement wise, probably give it maybe a 3 or a 4. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell. I don't think Air Force is very good. And so it's just like we're looking at one game sample size in which they ran the ball well for the first time all year, but they still didn't pass block well. And so it's just kind of like, well, you know, what do we really know about them? So maybe a 4 just because they finally had a really good running game. So that was nice to see. I still think they're below average in the conference. I would honestly say they might be even in the bottom 4, somewhere around there, maybe bottom 6. And that's just based on, I mean, watching the games. And then also, you know, you go look at PFF grades for this offensive line. 4 of their top 7 on the offensive line who play a large amount of snaps are under a 35 grade in pass blocking. That's just not good enough. I mean, at all. Luckily, Campbell Barrington is really kind of holding up the group in pass blocking because he's been truly awesome there so far this season. But there's clearly been some weaknesses and some holes on this offensive line, and there's still plenty of areas for them to get better. Run blocking has been pretty average, I would say, as a whole throughout the season, if you go look at the grades, but pass blocking has been far below average. So, yeah, bottom 4, bottom 6 is, I think, where they're at right now.
Yeah, I'm indifferent. I'm still like to be determined on what this group is, mainly because I do not believe that the offensive line started blocking miraculously better in the Air Force game. That's some of that's due to opponent, but we didn't see this in the Tarleton game either. I truly believe from a run blocking standpoint that Bryson Washington, Dominic Richardson make this group better. You just, from a vision standpoint, from a playmaking ability, those guys need help because it's not their strong suit. So I don't know what exactly Baylor has on the offensive line right now. I think we'll find out a lot more this week if they can build on what they did against Air Force. So if they go out and run for 150 yards, 160 yards against Colorado, then you say, okay, maybe what they did against Air Force was more legitimate. They're better than we thought. In pass protection, I think it can be schemed around. I don't know that if Sawyer's playing quarterback, he needs to get the ball out quick. He needs to be efficient with the ball. He needs to be able to get it out in 2.25 seconds pretty regularly. But that's a spread. That's this scheme in general across the country. Similar schemes are getting the ball out of the quarterback's hands, and it helps offensive line. That's what it's built to do. I don't know if I trust PFF necessarily on pass protection nearly as much as, say, run blocking, because there's so many layers to how that's graded and what's being called. So I'm just kind of to be determined on how much they've improved, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, we know that it started off pretty low from expectation standpoint. How much have they improved based on what we've seen against Air Force? I don't really know yet. Like, I just think we're not going to really know until this weekend and then moving forward. So offensive line is obviously a polarizing topic. I can't see anything that says, oh yeah, they improved drastically, or was it competition, or was it just getting a guy like Bryson Washington back and Dominic Richardson back? So great question. Moving on though, the next one we have is, if we win Saturday and you had to choose one of the following, which would you be more likely to pick? 8-4 or 5-7?
So initially when the season started, I had Baylor starting 4-1 and then still going 6-6. Now, I think some games later on in the schedule have maybe opened up a little bit. So I do think that if Baylor wins this game, I probably lean slightly closer to 8-4 than I do 5-7. That's kind of where I'm at right now, just because the Big 12 doesn't look great at the moment. I will say this though, I still have them 6-6, maybe trending 7-5 currently. And so winning this game just gets them closer to kind of solidifying that, as opposed to me saying, oh yeah, they're an 8-win team now.
Yeah. I mean, and the question is like, if it's truly only two options, 8-4, 5-7, I'm going with 8-4. And that's just based on how the Big 12's looked and what Baylor has done defensively. I think that the ceiling for this team can offense be consistent. So I'm with you. I think 8-4 seems, if Baylor wins on Saturday, 8-4 looks more likely than 5-7 to me. So there's a lot of ifs in there, but I'm with you. 8-4 just seems, at that rate, seems much more likely. Does our defensive line get to the quarterback enough to cause problems and or interceptions?
I mean, it better, or Baylor is losing this game. I think they will, but I do think this is one of those games where truly the additions that Baylor made this offseason are going to get tested, because Colorado has been okay at guard. Guard has not been their problem. It's mainly been center, and then their tackles, even their backup tackles, all have had struggles, especially against Nebraska. But it's really been all season. They haven't graded super highly in any game really this year. So I think, to me, this comes down to development of Garmin Randolph, the addition of Steve Linton, and the addition of Jacquez Evans, if he is trending towards being more healthy in this game. Those guys are going to matter a whole lot in this game. Obviously, you still want interior pass rush with Jackie Marshall and, potentially Cooper Lands and Trevin Maya, but and linebackers as well. But the one-on-one matchups with Garmin and Steve Linton and Jacquez Evans, I think, are going to be key, specifically Linton and Randolph, because they've been able to play throughout the season. So this is a big test for them, and one that they have an opportunity to really show something.
Yeah. So Colorado is basically starting a true freshman left tackle, a lot of transfers in the mix as well. There's some opportunities to take advantage of it. I think there's a potential role for Matt Jones rushing the passer too, depending on situations that he's been good at in his career from the linebacker position, to go on top of what the edge players could do. So great question. Obviously a big key to this game. Do we run it down their throat, or do we try to throw our way to a win regarding Baylor? I mean, I think it's kind of take what the defense gives you, which with this offense will always be. I think the preference is to run it. But what's there? What are they allowing you to do? What's their personnel? What's their injuries look like? Or what guys are playing? A lot can go into that. I think the potential for them to win is more likely if they're able to run the ball consistently than trying to throw away to win. But I think there's some confidence there with Sawyer Robertson specifically. If they have to pass, that they could potentially get it done.
I think efficiency passing and then a heavy dose of the run game, including the quarterback run game, are what are that's what would get the job done, I think, for Baylor's offense. So Sawyer being efficient, this doesn't mean hitting on, 350-yard touchdowns. I'm talking about just being accurate, being poised in the pocket, not turning the ball over, moving the chains, and then outside of that, running the football a lot, and Sawyer running the football a lot with his size. I think that's how Baylor wins this game, and I think that's probably the strategy that Baylor goes with.
Yeah, I'm running the football from the quarterback position could be big to keep the chains moving, keep the ball away from Colorado. Last question for today as we wrap up. Do our defensive backs cause headaches for Shedeur and get interceptions? I'll let you take this one. I don't know. That's a tough question.
I don't see it being plural. I think maybe they can get one interception, but I don't think they're going to shut down these receivers. I mean, if they do, it'll probably come because Shedeur's getting hit in the backfield by Baylor defensive linemen. But overall, I would say, I think Colorado's got the advantage on the outside. So I don't think it's going to be a whole lot of interceptions, a whole lot of bad throws by Shedeur. But I do think if Baylor has a lead late, they could probably get one from him later on in the game.
Yeah, so he has thrown in the last 2 years no multi-interception games. He's only had 3 of them in his career that I can see just here looking quick. And those were one game with 2 interceptions as a sophomore and 2 games, as a freshman. So none of them at Colorado as he's gotten better. I think truly this is an opportunity for Baylor to say, hey, you're not going to beat us deep. Let's see you execute down the field. And that's kind of been the game plan for everybody that's faced this offense. The key will be stopping the run game whenever they try to do it. So our Baylor family and all Colorado fans who are tuning into this, that's going to do it for today's episode of Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. Thanks to each of you for listening and all of the submitted questions for this special mailbag edition. For Grayson Grunhafer, I'm Colt Barber. Have a great game weekend and Sick 'em Bears.